From the moment we are born, we enter a world that is already in motion, shaped by the expectations, beliefs, and desires of those who came before us. As children, we are taught what is right, what is wrong, what is wrong, what is valued, and what is not. Often, these teachings are not malicious but come from a place of love. Yet, they carry with them an invisible weight, a set of rules, identities, and roles that slowly begin to feel like obligations. And so, without even realizing it, we start living not as ourselves, but as reflections of what others want us to be. But let's pause for a moment and consider, who are you when no one is looking? Not the you that fulfills obligations or seeks approval, but the one that exists independently of external validation. Can you remember the last time you made a decision entirely free from the influence of others, family, friends, society? For many of us, the answer is unsettling. We've been so conditioned to live for others that we confuse their expectations with our own desires. The problem with living for others is that it disconnects us from the present. When we live to meet expectations, we are always projecting into the future or dwelling on the past. We rehearse conversations in our minds, plan how to impress, or replay moments where we think we failed. Our focus is rarely on now, because now is often deemed unimportant unless it contributes to someone else's vision of success. But what if the present moment is all we truly have? What if the relentless pursuit of approval is not only futile but a betrayal of the very essence of who we are? The truth is, this living for others is a form of self-abandonment. It's a slow erosion of authenticity. Each time we prioritize external validation over internal truth, we lose a piece of ourselves. And yet, we do it. Why? Because we've been taught that approval equals worth. That love must be earned.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
That success is defined by others. But let me ask you something. If you stripped away all the expectations, all the roles you play, all the masks you wear, what would remain? Would you even recognize yourself? Or would you feel like a stranger in your own life? When we live for others, we are never truly free. We become prisoners of their opinions, their judgments, their needs. And here's the irony: the people we are trying to please are often just as lost as we are, trapped in their own cycles of seeking approval. It's a system that perpetuates itself generation after generation. But it doesn't have to. You can break free. The question is, are you willing to? Breaking free begins with a radical shift in perspective, the realization that your worth is not contingent on anyone else's approval. This is not an intellectual exercise, it's a visceral knowing that must be felt in the core of your being. It's the understanding that you are enough simply because you exist. This may sound simple, but it's one of the hardest truths to accept because it goes against everything we've been taught. To reclaim your life, you must first reclaim the present. The present moment is the only place where you can truly be yourself, free from the projections of others. But being present requires courage. It requires you to face yourself without distraction, and that can be terrifying. Because when you strip away the noise, you are left with the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are and who you are not. Are you ready to face that? Being present also means letting go of the stories you tell yourself about who you should be. These stories are often inherited from others, parents, teachers, society, but they are just that, stories. They are not you. The more you identify with them, the more you lose touch with the reality of now. And the reality of now is all that matters, because now is where life happens. Not in the past, not in the future. Right here, right now. But here's the paradox: the present moment is also the most difficult place to be. Why? Because the mind resists it. The mind thrives on time, on past regrets and future anxieties. It wants to solve problems, fix things, achieve goals. But the present moment has no problems. It simply is. And this is deeply unsettling to the mind. So it distracts you. It tells you that you need to be doing something, achieving something, impressing someone. It keeps you in a constant state of striving, always chasing, never arriving. So how do we overcome this? How do we return to the present when the pull of the mind is so strong? The answer lies in awareness. Awareness is the key to unlocking the power of now. When you become aware of your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, you create a space between you and them. You realize that you are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are the one observing them. And in that realization, you find freedom. But awareness is not a switch you can flip. It's a practice, a discipline. It requires you to be vigilant, to notice when you are being pulled out of the present, and to gently bring yourself back. It's not about perfection, it's about persistence. Every time you return to the present, you strengthen your connection to it. And the more connected you are to the present, the less power others have over you. Because the present moment is where you are most yourself, free from the influence of external forces. This is not to say that you should reject others or their opinions. We are social beings, and relationships are an essential part of life. But there is a difference between connection and dependence. True connection comes from a place of authenticity, where you can be yourself without fear of judgment. Dependence, on the other hand, comes from a place of lack, where you need others to validate your worth. The goal is not to isolate yourself, but to cultivate relationships that honor your authenticity. As you begin to live more in the present, you will notice a shift in your relationships. Some may deepen, while others may fall away. This is natural. When you stop living for others, you stop playing the roles they expect you to play. And this can be unsettling for them. But it's not your job to make others comfortable. Your job is to be true to yourself. And in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. Living for others is a habit. And like any habit, it can be unlearned. But it takes time, it takes patience, and it takes a willingness to face the discomfort that comes with change. Because change is uncomfortable. It forces you to confront parts of yourself that you may have been avoiding. But it's also liberating. It's the only way to reclaim the present, and in doing so, reclaim your life. So I ask you again, who are you when no one is looking? And are you willing to let go of who you think you should be in order to become who you truly are? This is not a question to be answered lightly. It's a question that requires you to go deep within yourself, to confront your fears, your doubts, your insecurities. But it's also a question that holds the key to your freedom. Because the moment you stop living for others is the moment you start living for yourself. And that, my friend, is the greatest gift you can give, not only to yourself but to the world. When we begin to confront the reality of living for others, we are faced with one of the most challenging truths. We've built much of our lives on the shaky foundation of expectation. These expectations don't just come from society or our families, they come from within us too. Over time, we internalize the voices of others, and they become our own. We tell ourselves we must succeed in certain ways, behave in certain ways, look a certain way, or achieve certain things. And when life doesn't align with these expectations, we suffer. But here's the critical question: who created these expectations? And why do we allow them to rule us? To live for yourself is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of courage. It's about stepping out of the roles you've been assigned and saying, "This is not who I am." But courage is rarely comfortable. It requires you to face the fear of rejection, the fear of failure, and perhaps the deepest fear of all, the fear of being misunderstood. Because when you stop living for others, you inevitably disrupt the status quo. You stop being predictable. You stop conforming. And this can unsettle the people around you. They may question you. They may resist your change. But their discomfort is not your responsibility. Your only responsibility is to live as fully and authentically as you can in this moment. But what does it mean to live authentically? It's not just about rejecting societal norms or breaking rules for the sake of rebellion. Authenticity is not a performance, it's the simple, yet profound act of being true to who you are, moment by moment. It's about aligning your thoughts, words, and actions with your inner truth rather than external expectations. And to do this, you must first know yourself. This is where many of us struggle, because how can you live authentically if you don't even know who you are? Many people go their entire lives without ever truly meeting themselves. They define themselves by their roles: parent, partner, employee, friend. They define themselves by their possessions, their achievements, their failures. But these are not who you are. They are things you do, things you have, things that happen to you. Strip them away, and what remains? This is not a rhetorical question. Take a moment to sit with it. Without the roles, without the labels, without the stories, what is left? The answer is not something you can put into words. It's not an idea or a concept. It's a presence, a being, a stillness. It's the part of you that exists beyond time and form. And it's always there, even when you're caught up in the chaos of living for others. The challenge is to reconnect with it, to make it your anchor, your guide. And the way to do this is through the present moment. When you live for others, your attention is constantly pulled outward. You're always thinking about what they want, what they think, how they'll react. But the present moment requires you to turn your attention inward. It invites you to let go of the noise and simply be. This sounds simple, but it's not easy, because the mind resists stillness. It craves distraction. It wants to solve problems, analyze situations, control outcomes. And so the first step in reclaiming the present is to observe your mind without judgment. Notice its patterns. See how it pulls you into the past or pushes you into the future. And when it does, gently bring yourself back to now. This practice of returning to the present is not about suppressing your thoughts or emotions. It's about creating space for them without being consumed by them. When you observe your thoughts, you begin to see them for what they are: temporary, fleeting, not inherently true. You realize that you don't have to believe everything your mind tells you. You don't have to act on every impulse. You can simply watch, like a sky watching clouds pass by. And in that watching, you find freedom. But freedom can be frightening. Because when you stop living for others, you lose the safety of familiarity. You step into the unknown, and the unknown is uncomfortable. It forces you to confront the possibility of failure, of disappointment, of loneliness. But it also opens the door to something far greater: the possibility of living a life that is truly your own. So I ask you, what are you willing to risk for the sake of your own freedom? Are you willing to disappoint people? Are you willing to let go of the need to be liked, to be understood? Are you willing to face the discomfort of not knowing what comes next? These are not small questions. They strike at the core of what it means to be human. But they are questions that must be asked if you want to break free from the prison of living for others. One of the greatest obstacles to living authentically is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being alone. But fear is not the enemy. The real enemy is avoidance, avoiding fear, avoiding discomfort, avoiding the truth of who you are. Because when you avoid these things, you give them power over you. You let them control your life. But when you face them head on, you begin to see them for what they are: illusions created by the mind. Fear thrives on the unknown, but the present moment is not unknown. It's here, it's real, and it's always enough. Living in the present doesn't mean that you abandon all responsibilities or stop caring about others. It means that you approach life from a place of presence rather than obligation. It means that you give yourself fully to whatever you are doing without being weighed down by the past or the future. It means that you listen to others not because you're trying to gain their approval, but because you genuinely want to connect. It means that you work not to prove your worth, but to express your creativity and contribute to the world in a way that feels meaningful to you. And here's the paradox: when you stop living for others, you actually have more to give, because you're no longer acting out of fear or obligation. You're acting from a place of authenticity, of wholeness. You're no longer trying to fill a void within yourself through external validation. Instead, you're sharing the fullness of who you are. And this is the greatest gift you can offer to the world. But authenticity is not a destination. It's not something you achieve once and for all. It's a practice, a daily choice. Each moment presents an opportunity to be true to yourself, or to fall back into old patterns of seeking approval. Some days you will succeed. Other days you will falter. And that's okay. The goal is not perfection. The goal is presence. So as we continue this exploration, I want you to consider, what are the expectations, roles, or beliefs that you are holding on to because of others? And what would it feel like to let them go? Not in some distant future, but right now. What would it feel like to step into this moment fully, without the weight of who you think you should be? This is where freedom begins, not in some grand transformation, but in the simple act of being here as you are. Let's take this deeper. If you've followed this far, you've likely begun to notice the subtle ways in which you've tied your sense of self to the expectations of others. You've probably realized how much of your life has been spent trying to meet standards you didn't create, chasing goals that don't truly resonate with you. But here's the thing: even when we recognize this, even when we see the ways we've been living for others, there's often still a part of us that clings to it. Why? Because letting go feels like losing something. Losing the approval we've worked so hard to gain. Losing the identity we've carefully constructed. Losing the safety that comes from being what others want us to be. But the truth is, you're not losing anything real. You're only shedding illusions. And as painful as that may feel, it's also liberating. The identities we cling to, the roles we play, the expectations we try to meet, they are not who we are. They are masks. And while masks can feel safe, they also suffocate. They prevent us from breathing fully, from living fully, from being fully alive. So the question is not, what will I lose if I stop living for others? The question is, what will I gain? What you will gain is freedom. Not the superficial freedom of doing whatever you want, whenever you want, but the deeper freedom of being at peace with yourself. The freedom to live without the constant need for validation. The freedom to exist without apology. The freedom to be fully present in your own life. But let's not romanticize this process. Letting go of the need to live for others is not easy. It requires you to confront the parts of yourself that are still tied to external approval. It requires you to sit with discomfort, to face the fear of rejection, the fear of being misunderstood. And it requires you to ask yourself some of the hardest questions you'll ever face. Who am I without my achievements? Who am I without my status, my possessions, my roles? Who am I without the approval of others? These questions are not meant to be answered quickly or easily. They are meant to unsettle you, to shake you loose from the illusions you've been living under. Because it's only when you let go of who you think you are that you can begin to discover who you truly are. And who you truly are has nothing to do with what you do, what you have, or what others think of you. It has everything to do with your presence, your being, your essence. But how do we access this essence? How do we move from living for others to living fully in the present? The answer lies in surrender, not the kind of surrender that implies giving up or resigning yourself to your circumstances, but the kind of surrender that means letting go of resistance. Resistance to what is, resistance to who you are, resistance to the reality of now. When you live for others, you are constantly fighting against reality. You are trying to mold yourself into something you're not, trying to fit into boxes that were never meant for you. This creates tension, conflict, suffering. But when you surrender, you let go of the need to be anything other than what you are. You stop trying to control how others see you, how they feel about you, what they expect from you. You simply allow yourself to be, and in that allowing you find peace. But surrender is not passive. It's not about sitting back and letting life happen to you. It's about actively choosing to align yourself with the truth of the present moment. It's about showing up fully, without pretense, without masks. It's about saying, this is who I am, and I will no longer apologize for it. This kind of surrender requires immense courage. Because when you stop living for others, you expose yourself. You make yourself vulnerable. You take off the armor you've been wearing for so long and you risk being hurt. But vulnerability is not weakness. It is strength. It is the willingness to be seen, to be known, to be real. And it is only through vulnerability that true connection is possible. Think about it. When you live for others, the connections you form are often shallow, based on roles and expectations rather than authenticity. But when you live authentically, you create the space for deeper, more meaningful connections. Because you are no longer hiding. You are no longer pretending. You are showing up as you are, and you are inviting others to do the same. But not everyone will accept this invitation. When you stop living for others, some people will resist. They will try to pull you back into the roles you've played, the masks you've worn. They may accuse you of being selfish, of changing, of abandoning them. This is not because they don't care about you, it's because your authenticity challenges their own. It forces them to confront the ways in which they too are living for others. And not everyone is ready for that. So what do you do when others resist your authenticity? You let them. You let them have their reactions, their judgments, their discomfort. And you hold your ground. Because their resistance is not about you, it's about them. Your only job is to stay true to yourself, to live in the present, to honor your own truth. And in doing so, you give them permission to do the same. Whether or not they choose to is up to them. This brings us to a deeper truth. Living authentically is not about isolating yourself or rejecting others. It's about creating a life that is rooted in connection, not dependence. Dependence is when you need others to validate your worth, to make you feel whole. Connection is when you share yourself fully without fear, without pretense. And true connection can only happen when you are present, because presence is the foundation of authenticity. When you are present, you are not thinking about what others think of you. You are not planning your next move or replaying your past mistakes. You are simply here, now. And in this state of presence, you are free to be yourself. You are free to listen, to speak, to act in alignment with your truth. And this is where true freedom lies, not in escaping others, but in being fully yourself in their presence. But let's not pretend that presence is easy. It's not. The mind will constantly try to pull you away from the now. It will tempt you with thoughts of the past, worries about the future, judgments about yourself and others. It will tell you that you need to prove yourself, to fix yourself, to be better, to do more. And it will tell you that living authentically is too hard, too risky, too uncomfortable. But the mind is not your master. It is a tool, a servant. And when you recognize this, you take back your power. You stop letting your thoughts control you, and you start living from a deeper place. A place of stillness. A place of presence. a place where you are no longer living for others, but for yourself. So I ask you now, what would it look like to live fully in the present? Not tomorrow, not next week, but right now. What would it feel like to let go of the need to be defined, to be approved of, to be understood? What would it feel like to simply be free, unburdened, alive? It's not an easy path, but it is the only path that leads to true freedom, and the choice to walk it is yours.